The new Monster Manual has one glaring omission, which makes it far worse than the 2014 5th edition rules in this one aspect. But in today's video, I'm going to fix it and give you the results for free. This video is sponsored by the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms, my mini factory campaign. More on them later. Greetings gamers, my name is Anto and I love monster design. I love reading new stat blocks, looking at families of monsters to see how they would work together, and making new monsters from scratch. In the lead up to the release of the revised 5th edition rules, I was super excited by a lot of the things that WotC were talking about in their marketing, but then I opened up the DMG and found the monster creation section to be seriously lacking. No matter, I said to myself,
maybe they've just moved these rules to the Monster Manual. It would make sense after all, having the monster creation rules in the Monster Manual.
So when my copy of the Monster Manual arrived from Wizards of the Coast, I immediately went looking for it. Oh yeah, after 5 years of relentless efforts, I finally got on the list, and WotC sent me a copy of the Monster Manual for free, but after I'd already bought a copy for myself, and given that this is the first video I'm making since getting this copy of the Monster Manual, and I'm about to talk about one of the biggest problems with it and how I'm going to fix it for free. Yeah, maybe they won't send me any more for free. Maybe they will. Who knows? But one thing's for sure, they're definitely not paying for this. So there I am going through the new Monster Manual book, looking for monster creation rules, and the intro has nothing. So I flicked to the back thinking maybe there's an appendix with more rules, and nope. This book and all of the revised 5th edition books have no concrete rules for creating monsters. There's only a wafer thin bit of advice in the DMG, which amounts to just reskin an existing monster, it'll be fine. So today I'm going to be walking you through how I made a quick monster builder for revised 5e and how you can use it as a dungeon master or someone who makes homebrew monsters. So in 2014 we had a system for building monsters that would give you all kinds of tweaks based on a number of different factors. For most DMs this isn't necessary, and the real gold was this: the quick monster builder on page 274 of the DMG, which gave you a list of typical values for AC, hit points, saves, damages, and a whole bunch of other stuff based on a monster's CR. Using this table, you can make a monster in seconds, which could perform well enough for a random encounter, or use it as the starting point for a more complex monster. But to recreate this, we're going to need data. So I spent the first week after the Monster Manual dropped going through the whole thing and inputting all of the monsters' stats into a massive spreadsheet. Over 500 monsters broken down into their initiative, their AC, their hit points, their damages per round, their saves, more information such as whether they've got legendary reactions, magic resistance, ability to cast spells, what their treasure is, whether or not they've got different bonuses, whether they've... One pointlessly long list later. And after doing all that work, what we're left with is this table. You can see there's some extra columns here for things like creature type, habitat, treasure, monster roles, and things like that. And all of this will allow me to more granularly search for monsters and like filter them out later on and use this as a really useful tool in the future, but it's not super important to the work that we're doing today. Now, to work out the damage per round, I took all of the monster's most damaging attacks and averaged them out across 6 rounds. I chose 6 rounds because there are a number of monsters that have a recharge 6 ability, so they're likely to only use it really once in a 6-round encounter. And then just like the guidance in building monsters in 2014, I assumed all monsters would always hit and all players would always fail their saves. I actually think this is the reason that so many monsters now have condition riders on their attacks, which don't require saves from the players, because it makes them much more consistent without having to have the players make any kind of save against these, and it means that the monsters are doing the things that they're supposed to be doing much more consistently, which is great for more balanced CR. Now, whenever a monster has an ability that's capable of hitting multiple creatures, I assumed it would hit 2. This is pretty standard for how WotC has advised on doing this in the past, like the 2014 DMG. When it mentions breath weapons, it says if there's an error of affecting, assume it always hits 2 creatures and they fail their saves. So let's do an example. Using the Black Dragon Wyrmling as an example, this monster can use a breath weapon, which deals 22 damage. So I've tracked that as 44 damage, assuming 2 creatures are hit on the round it uses it. It's also a recharge 5/6, which means across a 6-round combat, it's probably going to use this at least twice. And then the rest of the time, it's making 2 round attacks for a total of 14 damage per round. So when you average this out across a 6-round combat, its per round damage is 24. I don't want you to get overwhelmed by the math here. The point isn't for you to do a whole bunch of math. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from with this, because until the SRD drops, I'm not going to be releasing the full spreadsheet with all of the monsters broken down into it, because I don't need Pinkertons coming to my door. But I want you to understand the methodology I've used to get to this point, so that when you're looking at the numbers, you have a baseline understanding of how these numbers came to be. So after inputting 500 plus monsters, the next step was to build a table of averages, which takes the number from every monster in a CR bracket and gives us the average for their AC, their hit points, all the rest of it. Now for this, I gathered 3 types of data about most of these stats. The range, so what's the highest and lowest number in the data set, the average, so the sum of all the numbers divided by the sample size, and then the median. I know from experience that we're likely to run into some really wild outliers in this kind of data, and collecting the median and not just the average helps give us a truer picture of what a typical monster in each CR is going to look like without it getting skewed by outliers. The higher CR monsters here are less reliable because they've got much smaller sample sizes, which is why in the final table I've included the sample size. And we're also going to talk about how that impacts the final table in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms Frontier campaign over on my mini factory. Modifius are currently running a Frontier campaign to fund a range of Skyrim-themed miniatures available for you to pick up for home 3D printing. You can get a wide variety of models representing factions and characters from the game, including the mighty Imperial Legion, or you can side with Ulfric and his Stormcloaks.
Watch your tongue. You're speaking to Ulfric Stormcloak, the true High King.
And there's even a variety of Dwagar and skeletons for you to fill your dungeons with. And yes, you can pick up the Dragonborn and Fusro your way across your gaming tables. The campaign is already fully funded and unlocking stretch goals, including tons of new options for minis, and there's even one of the iconic Skyrim dragons up for grab when they unlock their next stretch goal. The Frontiers campaign is running until the 6th of April, and you can pick up a free STL of the Dragon Priest over on the Frontier page right now to test it out for yourself, and they're also running a painting competition for this mini until the 4th of April with more than $4,500 worth of prizes up for grabs. You can find all of the details for that over on the campaign page, linked down in the description below. Thanks again to My Mini Factory for sponsoring today's video and supporting the channel, but for now, back to the video. So once I'd built out that table of averages and medians, it was time to build out the actual quick monster builder. I wanted to give something that was a little less intimidating to look at, and this is where we start to stray from purely representing the numbers in the Monster Manual to some interpretation and choices on my part. The numbers in the Monster Manual don't go up in a linear fashion. There are multiple instances where an average creature stats actually drop pretty significantly as the CR goes up, either because of outliers in that CR bracket dragging down all the other monsters, or because the sample size is just so small. Because of this, I had to make a number of choices about what numbers to use for the builder to keep the numbers in line with the published monsters, but also to provide a progression that makes sense from like a human perspective. Like you look at this table and big number go up just tickles the monkey brain in a way that makes sense. So the way I approach this is I would usually choose an anchor number somewhere along the CR band, always at CR 30 or whatever the Tarask is, because that's the only data point we have for that CR. So I would use that to fill in the preceding few blanks, and then like CR 20, CR 10, and use those to kind of build out the gaps and go, right, okay, if the average at CR 10 is 10 and the average at CR 20 is 15, we know that the next 10 levels need to go through those 5 numbers to get to a place where it makes sense. But this is an imperfect system. It relies way too much on my decisions and my biases in how I like to present data, in how I like to run monsters and all of that kind of stuff. So in the final table, I've also included parentheses to show the official ranges for all of the monsters within a CR bracket. This can allow you as the DM to immediately see how far you can tweak a number up or down before you go out of bracket for that CR and start to get out of the realms of what you should be doing. I've also included 3 other columns here for damage resistances, legendary actions and reactions, and magic resistances. So rather than showing specific numbers here, these give you an idea of what percentage of monsters in each tier of play have these elements, so that when you're crafting your monster, you can look at those columns to get an idea if you should be adding these features. For example, if you're making a CR4 monster, you can see that it shouldn't have legendary actions or resistances, because with the exception of the unicorn, which is again one of those outliers, there are no legendary monsters in that tier of play. Now that we have the table, it's time to put it to the test and make a monster to show you how quick and easy this process is. For this example, let's build a siege giant at CR6. Looking at the table, we can see that our CR6 siege giant starting stats should be an AC of 15, hit points of 110, initiative of +3, a to hit bonus of 7, and it should be making 2 attacks per round and should be doing about 45 damage per round, which is around 22 damage per attack. If we need any saving throws, a DC of 14 is going to be about right. And if we were making this monster quickly and on the fly, that'd probably be all the information we would likely to need to be able to run it properly. But if we want to build this monster into something with a real stat block with some interesting abilities and the view to like publish this, we want to take this information and build it out just a little bit further. The first thing that we want to do is we want to establish the monster's ability scores. Now, this didn't exist in my initial table, so I had to go back through all 500 monsters and list out their average ability scores for each CR bracket to essentially generate a standard array for each CR bracket. What that left us with is 2+3s, 2+2s, and 2+1s as our ability modifiers for our CR6 monster. Again, if we were using this monster in a random encounter, we could just use these numbers and get its saving throws and we wouldn't need to do anything else. But because we want to build out a more robust monster, we're going to take these numbers and tweak them a little bit. As a CR6 creature, the Siege Giant has a proficiency bonus of +3, and we know that we want it to have an attack bonus of +7, which means that its attack ability modifier needs to be +4. So we're going to take one of those 3s, bump them up to a 4, and we're going to take one of those +1s and reduce it down to a 0, so that our standard array total remains the same, but we've just tweaked those numbers a little bit. In terms of where to put those numbers, we want this Siege Giant to be strong and tough, so we're going to go with high strength and high constitution. But I also think that I want this to be a creature that is mercenary and dealing with armies to ransack castles and doing it for coins, so I like charisma being the higher stat on the mental side of things. Then when it comes to saving throws, 3 saving throw proficiencies is pretty standard for a monster like this, and I think it makes sense to put them into strength and constitution and then one of the mental stats. I don't want to put it into charisma here because that'll just make it really good at all the things it's naturally really good at across the board, and I also want to make sure that we're leaving it with some natural vulnerabilities that the players can exploit if they learn a bit about it or if they think about the monster a little bit. So we're going to put that last saving throw proficiency into wisdom, leaving intelligence as the weak link. Then when it comes to traits, we've got a really easy starting point using the Siege monster trait, which gives creatures double damage on objects and structures, and that makes perfect sense for a Siege Giant. Then when it comes to attacks, that's where things start to get interesting. If we just wanted to make a really basic monster, what we could do is have some kind of siege battering ram that did about 22 damage per attack, and then give it some kind of ranged attack. But I think we can do something much more interesting with this creature's abilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it the siege ram, which is going to be a +7 to hit and deal 3d10 +4 damage per attack, so 20 damage per attack. And then for the ranged attack, I want to give it a siege cannon, this huge blunderbuss that it fills with weapons and scraps of armor and pieces of debris that it fires like a scatter shot into the enemy. I think that's a really cool visual image. This is going to be a cone weapon, a dexterity based saving throw, and the DC will be 14, just like it was outlined in the quick monster builder. It's going to deal 22 damage, and we'll assume that it's going to hit 2 creatures, which means that its attacks are going to be dealing 44 damage per round on average. We're going to make this a recharge 5/6 ability because it's got to load all the shrapnel in there, which means it's going to typically use this about twice per 6-round encounter, and that leaves us with a much more interesting monster than just 1 melee attack and 1 normal ranged attack. Now, you could stop here, but I want to take it further and get some more personality into this monster. And I also want to give it some options within the action economy, so some bonus actions, some reactions, and I want to show you what you need to do to tweak the damages based on those options. I think it would be fun if this giant had the ability to try and bite the head off the creature it had grappled, and I love the idea of this lumbering giant eating a humanoid like a snack. So to do this, we need to give it a new action, which will allow it to grapple a creature as part of that attack, and we could name this an unarmed strike or a fist, but given the narrative that we're trying to build here, I'm going to name this attack Come Here. And while we're at it, I think we should also add a knock prone rider to our siege ram, so any creature that's large or smaller that gets hit by the ram is also knocked prone. Johnny Silverhand comes crashing through the wall, Kool-Aid Man style. No, they'll be knocked prone because they're basically being hit by like a full-size tree trunk. Then from there, we're going to add a new bonus action, and this bonus action is going to be called Bite Their Head Off. And it's going to allow the giant to bite the head off a creature that is grappled, dealing an amount of piercing damage, and if they reduce a creature to 0 hit points, they bite their head off. And I also think it'd be funny if the giant used the creature that it had grappled and bit their head off like one of those like tube yogurt things, so I'm going to give it some sort of regeneration ability based on that as well. This is only going to be 3d6 or like 10 hit points recovered, and only if it kills a creature by biting their head off, so it's not something that's going to come up very often, but when it does, it's going to be really flavorful and memorable, and that's the vibe we're going for here. Simple abilities, but ones that add to the narrative of the monster, help the game master understand what this monster's all about, help them really easily deliver the flavor and the fantasy of the monster in the moment through the text of their rules, but also abilities that aren't so complicated that the game master has to grind to a halt to figure them out in play. Now, because we've introduced a new amount of damage into this bonus action, we're going to need to make sure that we're reducing the amount of damage that the giant is doing with its regular actions, so it's not doing more than our average damage per round. This process basically requires you to go back and forth tweaking damage numbers until you get something that lands in the range that you're aiming for when you spread it across actions, bonus actions, reactions, and legendary actions. One quick side note here, if you're building a monster that is above CR 13, I think it is, chances are they will have legendary actions. If they have legendary actions, one of those is going to be an attack, so you need to make sure you're very careful when you're working out your average damages, that you're accounting for the damage of those legendary attacks, because you can accidentally end up dealing too much damage in the regular actions if you don't. And then once that's done, what you're left with is something like this, my Siege Giant. This is a creature based on the quick monster builder stats, with some minor tweaks and then some fun abilities thrown in there. So the Siege Giant can tear down fortifications, it can fire its siege cannon into clusters of enemies and tear them apart with shrapnel, it can scoop up unfortunate enemies and eat their heads like a froob. And I also added another bonus action called Lob 'em, which allows the giant to throw a grappled creature, which gives it some battlefield control, allowing it to throw a threat 60 feet away from them. Finally, I gave him a reaction called Looking Out for Number 1. The idea here is that the Siege Giants are mercenaries, so if the person paying the bills dies, they're out of there. So if the creature that hired them dies, the Siege Giant can just get out of dodge without provoking attacks of opportunity. There we have it, a fun, flavorful monster that took almost no work on my part to make because all the numbers were pretty much done for me by the Quick Monster Builder. If you want to get your hands on the Quick Monster Builder for free, I'll leave a link to my Patreon down below where you can pick it up. And if you want to get the finished PDF of the Siege Giant, including its stat box, some encounter building tables, lore, and more, you can get that over on Patreon too for just $1. I'd love to know how you plan on using this Quick Monster Builder down in the comments. And if you want to keep watching, check out this video where I go over how I take notes I'm not going to forget as a game master. But until next time, happy gaming.